It was just a seemingly harmless piece of surveillance footage, capturing a young girl with a backpack on her way to school. But within that very frame, investigators noticed a small detail, a chilling detail, because it was the final clue that led them to the truth behind a shocking case no one expected. In March 2017, in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, a suburban area near Tokyo known for its peaceful lifestyle, discipline, and high level of safety, a case involving a Vietnamese girl quickly drew widespread public attention. Initially, it was considered an unusual missing person case when an elementary school student failed to arrive at school as usual. However, within a short time, the situation escalated into a serious criminal investigation, involving a large-scale police operation and attracting significant media attention both within Japan and internationally. What made this case particularly striking was not only the nature of the crime, but also the context in which it occurred, a society that places near absolute trust in safety, where children can walk to school alone every day without direct supervision. Yet, within that seemingly secure environment, a criminal act was carried out quietly, without drawing attention, and without leaving clear signs from the outset. Investigators later determined that this was not an impulsive act driven by momentary emotion, nor was it the result of personal conflict or material gain, but rather a calculated act that exploited gaps in supervision and the community's sense of trust. As more details gradually came to light, the case not only shocked Japan, but also sparked strong concern within the Vietnamese community worldwide, as it raised a profound question: are the things we believe to be safe truly safe? In this story, we will refer to her as Mai, a 9-year-old girl living with her family in Japan. Her family is Vietnamese, having moved to Japan to work and settle with the goal of building a stable, long-term life. Her parents worked hourly jobs. Their life was not wealthy, but it was structured and disciplined, with daily routines centered around work and their child's education. In the context of Japanese society, where children are encouraged to be independent from an early age, Mai walking to school by herself every day was completely normal and had become a fixed part of the family's daily routine. Mai attended a local elementary school and blended into the learning environment like any other student in the area. She followed a clear routine, leaving home in the morning at a familiar time and taking a fixed route to school. This route was located within a residential neighborhood, not far from her home, and was generally considered safe. There had been no prior reports suggesting that she had been threatened or followed. To her family and the surrounding community, everything appeared normal, with no factors indicating any specific danger. A key point in the case file is that Mai was not targeted due to any personal relationship or existing conflict. She was a child selected in the context of traveling alone, following a routine repeated every day. This characteristic makes the case typical of an opportunistic act, where the offender targeted a vulnerable victim within a short window of time and without direct supervision. It is also this factor that made prevention more difficult, as prior to the incident, there were no specific signs indicating that Mai was facing any danger. On the morning of March 24, 2017, Mai left her home in the Matsuda area, Chiba Prefecture, at around 7 a.m., following her usual routine to go to elementary school. This was a fixed time she maintained every day, and the route she took was a short path leading to the student gathering point before entering the school. According to the investigation, this distance was not far, located within a residential area and typically frequented by students. However, at that specific time, Mai was determined to be traveling alone. Security cameras in the area recorded the last images of Mai as she was walking along her familiar route, with no unusual signs in her behavior or surroundings. However, within a very short period of time afterward, she no longer appeared in any other frames and did not reach the gathering point as expected. This indicates that the incident occurred within an extremely brief time gap, where there was no direct supervision and no witnesses intervened. Based on the subsequent investigation, authorities determined that the suspect took advantage of this exact moment when the victim was moving alone and the area drew little attention to approach and gain control of the situation. There were no reports of loud noises or any incident attracting attention in the area at that time, indicating that the act was carried out quickly, deliberately, and with minimal risk of detection. From what seemed like an ordinary morning, Mai's disappearance marked the beginning of a serious criminal case, with events unfolding within just a few minutes, but leaving consequences that lasted long afterward. Immediately after Mai did not arrive at the gathering point and was absent from school, the school quickly contacted her family that same morning. Initially, the family still hoped that this might just be a misunderstanding or that she had wandered somewhere within the familiar area. However, when searching around the home and along her usual routes yielded no results, the concern began to turn into alarm. The family immediately reported it to the police, and the case was identified as a missing person case requiring urgent intervention. In the following hours, authorities coordinated with local residents to conduct a wide-scale search. Areas surrounding the route to school, parks, vacant lots, and places where children might pass through were all examined. The police also began collecting data from security cameras, reconstructing the victim's last known route in order to determine the exact point at which she disappeared. However, the lack of direct witnesses and the absence of clear signs at the initial scene made this process significantly more difficult. A few days later, as the search area was expanded beyond the initial residential zone, authorities discovered the victim's body in another area within Chiba Prefecture. This information immediately confirmed that this was no longer a typical missing person case, but a serious criminal case. The scene was secured, and forensic and criminal investigation units were deployed to collect evidence, determine the sequence of events, and trace any individuals involved. From this point on, the direction of the investigation shifted entirely to identifying the suspect. The police focused on analyzing data related to the victim's residential area, reviewing individuals who may have had access during the time the incident occurred, while cross-referencing information from cameras, means of transportation, and other relevant factors. Initial hypotheses were proposed, notably the possibility that the suspect was not an outsider, but someone familiar with the area and well aware of the victim's daily routine. This marked a crucial turning point, opening a new approach in the investigation process and gradually narrowing the scope of suspicion. After narrowing down several potential individuals of interest, investigators did not rush to immediate conclusions, but instead cross-checked multiple layers of data to gradually eliminate possibilities. The key lay in connecting seemingly unrelated details into a coherent logical sequence. First, from the area's security camera system, police identified vehicles that appeared within the same time frame as the victim's disappearance. Among them, one locally registered vehicle drew attention due to a travel pattern that did not match the owner's initial statement. This vehicle was seen near the area where the victim was traveling and was later recorded at several other locations within a very short period of time, forming an unusual movement pattern. From this point, investigators began to focus on the vehicle's owner. They did not only examine his stated schedule, but also analyzed his entire activity throughout the day, including the time he left home, his stops, and periods that could not be clearly accounted for. When cross-referenced with camera data and collected timestamps, a gap began to emerge, a period long enough for the crime to have occurred but not reasonably explained by the suspect. This became the first factor that shifted the suspect from being possibly involved to requiring deeper investigation. After narrowing the scope of the investigation, authorities began focusing on a specific suspect, Yasumasa Shibuya, 46 years old, a resident living in Matsuda City, just about 300 meters from the victim's home. What made the case particularly notable was that Shibuya was not a stranger, but had served as the president of the Parent-Teacher Association at the very elementary school the victim attended, and was also involved in daily student traffic safety activities. In this role, the suspect had frequent access to students and was familiar with their routines, including the fact that the victim often went to school alone. However, a notable detail was that on the morning of March 24th, the day the victim disappeared, Shibuya did not appear at his usual duty position, creating the first irregularity in his schedule. On April 14th, 2017, Shibuya was arrested on an initial charge related to the unlawful handling of the victim's body in the Ebiko area, Chiba Prefecture. However, the investigation did not stop there. Samples collected from the scene and the victim's body were subjected to forensic examination, and the results showed that the suspect's DNA matched the DNA found on the victim. This became decisive evidence, shifting the case from suspicion to clear grounds for prosecution and elevating the charge against Shibuya to murder. Alongside the DNA evidence, data from security cameras played a crucial role in breaking down the suspect's statements. During a voluntary interview prior to his arrest, Shibuya provided a travel timeline for March 24th. However, when compared with camera footage, police discovered that this timeline did not match. Specifically, on the night of March 24th, after the victim had disappeared, cameras near the area where the body was later found captured one of the suspect's two vehicles appearing at the location. In addition, around midday that same day, in the area where the victim's backpack was discovered, cameras also recorded a smaller vehicle, also under Shibuya's use, moving back and forth multiple times. Notably, this same vehicle appeared again in the evening near the location where the body was found. Another detail that further reinforced suspicion was that on the evening of March 24th, the suspect's vehicle was not parked in its usual location, indicating a change in behavior after the time the incident occurred. When all of this data was put together from geographic location, role in the community, unusual absence, inconsistent travel routes, to DNA evidence, it formed a cohesive chain of evidence that not only placed the suspect at the right time and location, but also eliminated other possible explanations. A deeper analysis of the recruitment behavior showed that the group behind it did not select targets randomly, but followed very specific criteria. They focused on young women from smaller cities, those without international work experience, but with a clear desire to change their lives. The victims' social media profiles often reflected an interest in fashion and beauty, along with carefully curated personal images, which made it easier for the perpetrators to approach and build trust. To reinforce credibility, the recruiters also created fake accounts of successful models, posting professional photos, luxurious lifestyles, and international projects, forming a false verification system that led victims to believe they were stepping into a genuine opportunity. Instead of applying direct pressure, investigators used a strategy of repetition and detailed probing, asking the suspect to explain the time gaps and the discrepancies between his statements and the collected data. As evidence such as forensic results and DNA data was introduced, the suspect's room for explanation became increasingly limited. His responses grew more cautious, the time taken to answer lengthened, and the consistency of his account clearly declined. However, despite the pressure from the evidence and the continuous cross-examination, Yasumasa Shibuya maintained silence regarding the key accusations, providing no clear explanation for the critical details. This silence caused the investigation and the clarification of the full sequence of events to take longer than expected, forcing authorities to rely almost entirely on physical evidence, objective data, and forensic results to complete the case file. In this context, the focus of the investigation no longer lay in the suspect's statements, but shifted to building a chain of evidence strong enough to prove the entire act without requiring the suspect's cooperation. Before the suspect was brought to trial, the case had quickly moved beyond the scope of a typical criminal investigation and became the center of public attention in both Japan and Vietnam. The victim's family, in their pursuit of justice, repeatedly expressed their desire for authorities to handle the case with the strictest measures in accordance with the law. Beyond legal procedures, they also actively called for public attention, aiming to ensure that the case would not be forgotten and that all related factors would be thoroughly examined. During this time, an online petition campaign was launched, attracting participation from a large number of Vietnamese both domestically and abroad, as well as a portion of Japanese citizens. The number of signatures increased rapidly within a short period, reflecting the level of public concern and outrage over the serious nature of the case. Commemorative activities, information sharing, and calls to raise awareness about child safety were also organized, creating a strong wave of response from the community. The victim's father, almost every day, was present at crowded train station areas, carrying petition sheets and personally standing there to explain the story to passers-by. He patiently repeated the same request, asking people to sign in order to demand the strictest possible sentence under the law. This work was not easy, especially in the context of language barriers and cultural differences, but he continued consistently, from morning to evening, as the only way to ensure that his child's voice would not be forgotten. At the same time, the mother used social media to share information about the case, provide updates on its developments, and call on the community to speak out. Her posts quickly spread widely, not only within the Vietnamese community, but also reaching Japanese citizens and foreigners living there. Each message, each appeal, carried a single desire: that justice must be carried out clearly and transparently. The petition campaign gradually expanded, with the number of signatures increasing day by day. These signed petitions were later collected and sent to the family, including some that were delivered directly to the child's grandmother in Vietnam. Sheets of paper filled with hundreds, even thousands of signatures were not just numbers, but a reflection of the community's empathy and support. For the family, this was proof that they were not alone on this journey. However, despite the significant public attention, the Japanese judicial system continued to proceed according to established procedures, ensuring that the trial would be based on evidence and legal regulations rather than being influenced by emotions or external pressure. The pretrial phase, therefore, was not only a process of completing the legal case file, but also a period in which two parallel forces coexisted. On one side, the strong demand for justice from the family and the community, and on the other, the caution of the legal system in ensuring a fair trial. It was precisely this intersection that made the case one of the notable examples where public emotion and legal principles coexist, but do not fully align. The trial of the main suspect officially began in late June 2018 at the Chiba District Court, marking the most critical phase of the entire case. From the very first days of the proceedings, a large number of people and journalists gathered outside the courthouse early in the morning. Many arrived hours before the doors opened in the hope of securing a seat inside the courtroom, as the number of available seats was strictly limited by regulations. The atmosphere outside the courthouse was described as tense but orderly. Hundreds of people lined up waiting, including local residents, members of the Vietnamese community in Japan, and media organizations. Due to the number of applicants exceeding capacity, the court had to implement a lottery system to select those allowed inside. As a result, many who had waited since early morning were still unable to attend the trial in person, but remained outside to follow updates through the media. Inside the courtroom, the trial proceeded in accordance with legal procedures, with the participation of the panel of judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. The evidence was presented systematically, ranging from DNA data and camera footage to forensic examination results and behavioral analysis. Each detail in the case file was introduced to reconstruct the entire sequence of events, helping the panel of judges gain a comprehensive and objective view before delivering the final verdict. They would immediately isolate the victims from other passengers under the pretext of VIP service. From that moment on, all communication with the outside world was completely cut off. The victims were monitored by cameras 24/7, had their phones confiscated, and were threatened with the lives of their families. They were shown images of their relatives and home addresses to create psychological pressure and force absolute compliance. Medical care for the victims was carried out by bribed doctors in order to conceal the true causes of injuries and illnesses. At least 3 medical personnel were directly linked to this criminal network. They received enormous sums of money to remain silent. They provided medication and handled the consequences of abuse, yet never reported anything to the authorities. The investigation also uncovered connections between this network and similar organizations in other countries within the same region. The prosecution emphasized that the act was not entirely random, but involved taking advantage of the victim's habit of traveling alone. They argued that the suspect, through his role in activities related to students, had the opportunity to observe and understand the victim's routine, thereby selecting an appropriate time to carry out the act. The chain of evidence presented did not rely on a single factor, but on the combination of multiple independent data points, each of which, on its own, might not be sufficient to draw a conclusion, but when put together, formed a complete picture that eliminated other possible explanations. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys focused on questioning the indirect nature of certain pieces of evidence and emphasized that the suspect did not provide a confession. They attempted to raise doubts regarding the interpretation of the data and the possibility of alternative scenarios. However, because the suspect remained silent for most of the trial and failed to provide clear explanations for the inconsistencies, the defense arguments faced significant limitations when confronted with the verified body of evidence. After reviewing the entire case file, the panel of judges concluded that the chain of evidence was strong enough to establish the suspect's criminal responsibility. The court determined that the offense was of an especially serious nature, causing severe consequences and having a profound impact on society. However, when considering factors within Japan's legal framework, including the number of victims, the defendant's prior record, and the criteria for applying the highest penalty, the court ultimately decided to sentence Yasumasa Shibuya to life imprisonment. This verdict officially brought the prolonged trial process to a close, marking the end of the legal phase of the case. Although it was not the highest possible sentence under the law, the court's decision reflected how the Japanese judicial system balances the severity of the offense with existing legal standards. For the public and the victim's family, the ruling continued to evoke mixed emotions, but from a legal standpoint, it represented the final conclusion reached after all evidence had been thoroughly examined. After the incident, Mai's family not only had to face an irreparable loss, but also entered a challenging legal journey in a country that was not their homeland. They attended court hearings, spoke out to seek justice for their child, and called for greater attention to child safety. Their story quickly spread within the Vietnamese community in Japan as well as in Vietnam. Many people organized memorials, candlelight vigils, shared information, and expressed outrage over what had happened. This was no longer the pain of a single family, but became a shared grief of an entire community. My story raises a profound question that still remains relevant today. In an environment considered safe, what was overlooked? How could someone exist within a community without being detected until it was too late? And more importantly, what can be done to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future? Because sometimes, the most frightening things are not what we see, but what we believe could never happen. The case you have just watched was produced by our channel's team based on a real incident that occurred in March 2017 in Chiba Prefecture, Japan, with information compiled and cross-checked from official sources such as investigation records and reliable media reports. Although the case has been legally concluded, what it left behind has never truly ended. What remains is not only the sequence of events, but the way it forces us to reflect on the smallest aspects of daily life, repetitive routines, seemingly insignificant moments, and even the assumptions we make about safety. Some lessons do not come from warnings, but from what has already happened when there is no longer a chance to change the outcome. And for that reason, telling this story is not meant to create fear, but to remind us to be more aware, to pay closer attention, to care more, and to protect those who are most vulnerable, especially children. If you are interested in cases analyzed from investigative and psychological perspectives, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content.